So what do calcium deficiencies look like? In fruit, you might end up with an apple that has something called bitter pit. This is basically due to a lack of potassium. And I can't tell you exactly why this happens in apples, but I can tell you why it happens in tomatoes. And in tomatoes, we end up with something called blossom end rot, which is basically a lack of calcium, or it is a function of tomato plants growing to such a great extent that even if the soil is adequate in calcium, the uptake can't keep up with the plant demands. So in this system here, unlike when an apple is fully ripened, in tomatoes, there are green tomatoes in the background. And to offset these tomatoes in the background from ending up having blossom end rot, you could add calcium to the soil. I've done this before in my garden, and it seems to offset the blossom end rot in tomato. But in our field crops, how do we diagnose a deficiency symptom? And oftentimes, a deficiency in calcium will lead to vascular system collapse. And this is because calcium plays a role in cell structure and preventing cells from essentially opening up and discarding their contents into the environment. So when calcium is lacking, the vascular tissue starts folding on itself because the cell structure is collapsing. And you see this, and it looks very strange, but to diagnose this deficiency symptom, for example, in this picture in the bottom right-hand corner, this looks like pepper to me. And where do you see the deficiency symptom? First of all, you see it in newer leaves or younger leaves, and it's curling. And this should tell you a few things. One, it should tell you that this might be a calcium deficiency. And two, it tells you something about the mobility or lack thereof in plants. Up until this point, the macronutrients that we've discussed, specifically nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, all have shown deficiencies in older leaves, and they're macro elements. But in this case of calcium, which is a secondary macro element, the deficiency manifests itself in younger leaves. And so this tells you that calcium is not mobile in plants. Another way of expressing this is that calcium is not scavenged from the older leaves and translocated to the newer leaves. And thus, calcium is immobile in plants. So, blossom end rot in tomatoes, leaf curling due to vascular systems collapse, and it's expressed in newer leaves or younger leaves.